Okay. Hello. I've noticed that whenever I start videos now, I start with a clap. And it's like I feel like I can't start without the clap. So anyhow, we are here. Um, Thanks so much for watching. And this week I thought we might do something a little bit different. And one of the recent questions that I asked you all as a tribe about the progress parties was, if there was one thing that I could help you do, what would it be? So one of you had mentioned, and I'm sure that this actually represents quite a few of you, you wanted to figure out how to stop procrastinating and be motivated to do a certain thing. Super, super common, right? And something that I have struggled with quite a bit myself and that a lot of us deal with. So when it comes to procrastinating in the Map Your Progress world, I view it a little bit differently. And having been someone that's wrestled with procrastination for literally decades, basically, I have found that it works much better when we're able to kind of break things down and look at it a little bit differently. What I mean by that is that often when we're procrastinating, we have this idea in our head, usually sourced by what I call clever brain, which is essentially that part of our brain that is sourced in fear, that comes up with all the the messages about how it's not going to turn out, how it's going to suck, how it's going to be terrible, how it's going to fail, we're going to be embarrassed, all that kind of stuff. So when we are in procrastination, our brain can get very clever and very reasonable about why we should not move forward with something. And so that's where we get to kind of shift that from a place of being fearful and afraid into something that is more loving and kind to ourselves. Because when we can move into a loving perspective, then we can actually get into action and take small actions coming from love. And depending on what it is that you're procrastinating or what it is that you want to do, those steps are going to look different. So let me first get back to this whole fear that we have around whatever it is that we're procrastinating. Big believer that whatever it is that we're procrastinating on is for good reason. So as human beings, I believe that the things that we do are all founded in reason, even if we're not necessarily conscious of that. So when you're looking at whatever it is, this thing that you're procrastinating, I want you to kind of get clear on what the story is that you're telling yourself about this thing. And for me, it's helpful to write that down. So you're welcome to just jot that down. And it doesn't have to be a super long thing, but just for yourself, getting clear as to what you think is going to happen if you don't, what you think is going to happen by moving forward on this thing. Like how terrible it's going to be, how much it's going to take, how you don't know enough, how you don't have enough energy, how you don't have enough time, and look at the reasons why moving forward might not be good. And look at the reasons why staying stuck, staying where you are, staying in the procrastination is actually working for you. Because that part of your brain, the very clever part, is going to subconsciously and often slyly protect you from perceived threats. So what I mean by that is something that I have been procrastinating on recently is writing this series of emails for a very specific purpose. And I have been successfully procrastinating this series of emails for months now, right? And so when I think about what is the deal with me in these emails and why is it something that the writing of them is something I've been putting off and making into a bigger deal. And one of my favorite clever brain tricks when it comes to procrastination is how much time it's going to take for me to do this series of emails and how I have so much going on and I just don't have the time to do this. Right? Because it sounds so reasonable, especially when you consider all the other things that are going on in your life. And, you want to make sure that you're not overextending yourself or, keeping your schedule. And so you need to prioritize and, these things will just get moved to the bottom, which is totally what I've been doing. Right? So one of my favorite things to do when I'm looking at that and, what I'm getting out of believing that I don't have enough time to write is that I don't have to write. I don't have to get uncomfortable. I don't have to, sit down and work through any of the resistance to actually get the words on paper. It gets to be something that I can responsibly, in my head, be able to put off until a later date and be okay with that. So that's one aspect of it, which is fine. But oftentimes there's certain things that we're procrastinating on that really do have significant consequences if we don't move forward on them. And so in this example with the writing and the I don't have time, one of the things that I like to do with myself is just take out a timer, and I just use the one that's on my phone, and actually time myself for how long it takes me to write something. And what you can do if you want to break that down even to even smaller pieces is, like, let's say you just write for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 1 minute, whatever it is that feels like something that you're willing to do. Like, not a big deal, could totally handle that. Let me go for my, 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And so one of the ways that I use the maps to help me in moving through my procrastination is to just break it down into these tiny pieces and have each of those tiny pieces that is not overwhelming represented by a swirl. So what you can do if you want to give this a try is you can go and get your 10 swirl hearts. And this is something that I offer you for free if you go to mapyourprogress.com and go to the Make Progress section. You'll see an option for Progress Mapping 101. And when you go to Progress Mapping 101, it's a free mini course where I teach you all the basics about progress mapping, including this download, so that you can start practicing yourself. And so for this particular example that I'm using with writing this thing, one of the swirls that I have here is just 5 minutes of writing. And I'm calling it like a 5-minute free write, not putting any pressure on it. Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be something that I'm going to use, but it's just enough to kind of coerce is really the right way, but just to have me be willing to start and just see how that feels. Because again, procrastination is sourced in fear and what we think is going to happen. And then when we get into love and taking a small action, one that we can do, then we start to prove to ourselves what's actually true. And instead of it being a theoretical, then we have something that we can say, oh, okay, but I actually just did this. And so now I know that I can, write about this much in 5 minutes, and it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay. So that's one example where it's just the little tiny things and the practice of doing those things over and over. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing, but the idea of taking those small steps again and again is what allows us to move through the fear and start to build a trust with ourselves that these things that we're procrastinating on actually aren't that bad. And so another thing that I use for the writing, these are just some other ideas. Sometimes I just don't want to write anymore because I've been sitting at my computer for so long. And so I'll just use my phone and a little voice memo, and I'll record myself. And I'll just sort of think like, okay, so if I was talking to these people whom I'm wanting to write to, what is it that I really want them to know? Like, just say it, just get it out. And so I'll just, take all pressure off and just say whatever it is until I feel like I got it out and complete about it. And then I can take that, and if there's something useful, I can listen back to it and pull something from it. Sometimes I even transcribe the voice memo, which is another way that I like to get myself into action, where it's not like writing, because it doesn't require a lot of thought on my part. But when I transcribe something, it allows me to get some things down on paper that are then easy for me to see and pull and use as a basis for more writing and for more ideas. So it's something that's enjoyable enough to me that it gets me into action. And I think when it comes to whatever it is that you're procrastinating on, it's just about being creative and thinking of these little things that you can do that are in the direction of where you want to go, but are small enough that you're willing to actually do them. And you know that they're small enough when you actually do them. If it's, instead of it just being something that's sitting here and it's like, yeah, I'll get to that eventually. If you can just pick one of these today, and, if I just do 5 minutes of writing today and color in that swirl to acknowledge that I've taken one step toward the direction that I want to go, that feels good. That feels better. That feels like something that I've stepped out of fear and into something that I have control over. Because that's another thing that our clever brain loves to, go on and on about, is the uncertain future, things that we have zero control over. So again, antidote to the coming out of fear, stepping into love, coming from action, and just doing one thing that we can do today that we can then color in, celebrate, be proud of have that be a tiny victory that is in service of this goal that we want to do. So when it comes to procrastination, there's not, in my view, at least in my experience, not like one magical flip switch kind of thing, you know, that it's just like, oh, okay, I used to be a procrastinator yesterday and now I totally have it handled. That has not been my experience, but I have gotten a lot better in being able to understand kind of what's going on and realize that I do have choices and I do have control over my actions and the tiny steps that I take. And so just being able to, again, break it down into a piece that is appetizing enough that you will actually do it. And if you find that you're not actually doing it, it's not a big deal. It's not a sign that you've like failed or that you're going to be a procrastinator forever. It's just a sign that you need to break it down into an even smaller piece. So if the 5-minute free write was too much for me, like I said, I could bring it into, 3 minutes or 30 seconds, or I could have it be longhand, or I could just write about how I don't know what to write about. To me, that counts. That's one step closer. That's like one more conscious choice closer to actually writing and getting where it is that I want to go. So to my lovely mapper who had the question about procrastination, I hope that helps you. And I would love to hear from you. And, once you start experimenting, get the 10 swirl heart, get in there. You can write in like whatever that idea that you have, you write it in the swirl. And then you can just use this kind of as your guide to go and take it one swirl at a time, color it in, come back here, let me know how it's going, and I can answer more questions for you. So there we go. Answered.